Right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in today's webinar. The focus on today's webinar will be on developments around AML, financial crime compliance. And you're welcome to another Like Minds webinar. Like Minds is a group of African diaspora in the UK aimed at providing manpower development amongst its members. We've been having these webinars for the past couple of weeks, ever since the lockdown started. And we've had a similar one, I think two relating to AML. One was from an IT perspective. I think we're going to have a very in-depth review from Mark Anderson, our facilitator, and including risk for concerning recent financial crime compliance and related issues. I was privy to attend one of his webinars at my bank, and it was very, very productive. And that's why I chased up with him, and I'm glad to have him today to do justice to a very, very important topic, a regulatory topic, in fact. Every organization must have compliance persons and KYC individuals. So it's a very, very important and very, very contemporary topic today. So just for housekeeping, so if you join in, please ensure you keep your mics on mute. And yeah, that's about it really. So we're going to have 1 hour plus with Mark doing the presentation. Then afterwards, we're going to have like 20-25 minutes to do Q&A session. So without any further ado, I want to invite Mark Anderson to introduce himself again, a little bit more by himself, and he starts the webinar, and we'll go from there. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I spend my life delivering training courses and webinars on anti-money laundering. I'm a banker by profession, and I have worked in London, in the US, in India. I've lived and worked in the Middle East, and I've been to Nigeria many times to deliver various types of training sessions. So, you know, I will give the presentation. I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible to all of you, and you can send me little messages if you like, and I'll try and answer them, but there will be plenty of time at the end for questions. Now, you can see here from the first slide, the job that anyone in compliance has is horrible. It's horrendous. 220 regulatory changes on average per day. And some of them may be third-party changes. Some of them that we see are changes of words and inferences in the meaning of words. Some of them are things that come out of trade bodies like Wolfsburg, for example. And I don't know how many of you have seen the latest Wolfsburg stuff, but actually it looks like it's been written by a child of 5, and it also looks like it's been written by people with very little experience of the real world. And you're seeing the real world, and I see the real world, and we know what's really going on. The first point I want to make here, and it's why I've put a black swan up here. And you will know yourselves that a black swan is an event that normally within financial markets that no one has seen before. And the same is true of AML and financial crime. And what we all tend to forget sometimes is that the people who are the criminals, the people who are laundering the money, the people who are transporting individuals across continents and charging them for it, the people who are funding terrorist groups, etc., they're really good at their jobs. This is what they do. It's their careers. They are really, really good at it. And while we've started looking at Estonia, and while we've started looking at, say, Airbnb, they are off laundering money elsewhere. And we'll look at some of the places that that they're laundering money. But the truth is, they are very good. And I will guarantee you, there are thousands of money laundering schemes out there going on right now that we know nothing about. And every time we put a finger to plug the hole in the sea wall, something else is happening. And my point about this is that rules and regulations, policies and procedures are reactive. They're based on what we've seen. They're based on what we know. And therefore, they're never going to be sufficient. And what the regulators are trying to get around, and I applaud them in doing this, is that everything should no longer be a tick box exercise. And the amount of banks who've come up in front of the regulator or asset managers or whatever, and they've said, yes, but actually we ticked all the boxes. Here are our policies and our procedures, and we did them all. And here's a little check sheet showing what you've done. Well, that doesn't stop the fines. And the regulators are saying that's no longer sufficient. And you will know, for those of you operating in Europe, you'll know we've had a whole raft of new regulations called 4 and 5 and 6 MLD. And they've come from the FATF 2012 recommendations. So, Lord above, it's taken 5 years for the EU to get its act together. And many of these regulations are still not enforced throughout the EU. Some countries have issues. For example, Germany has issues with data privacy. But the EU is suing France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Spain for not implementing this stuff on time. And so we've got this raft of regulations, but it's still patchy and it's still rather complex for some people. But all the regulations now talk about this idea of risk. And the phrase they use is the risk-based approach. And you can see here that the word risk is used a lot in all the new directives, because risk is dynamic. Risk is always changing. So as the criminals move out of Airbnb and, let's say, into horse racing, then we know to follow the risk. And we know that we can at least try to stop them by looking at the risk. The EU has gone a stage further, and they have decided, and this really comes about through countries, I'm afraid, like Malta, which is exceedingly high risk for money laundering and financial crime. To give you an example, I know people always hold up Nigeria, but actually you look at Malta. When you come out of the airport in Valletta in Malta, the road signs and the adverts are in 3 languages. They're in Maltese, they're in English, and they're in Russian. Go figure. So the fact that Malta and also Cyprus, and to a certain extent Luxembourg, were dragging their heels on these new regulations, the EU have decided that the European Banking Authority can, as a last resort, send in a task force and force these countries and these organizations to do their jobs properly. And the EU we have enormous issues with Malta. And I've written about this and I've taught out there, etc. And there are many people in the Maltese government who are linked directly or indirectly to organized crime groups. And I always love it when the Maltese commissioners in the EU come on and lecture us about something or other. It always makes me smile somewhat. The EU also came out with its blacklist this year, and you can see them here. It's 20 high-risk countries, and it essentially means that everyone who wants to do business either in this country or with an institution based in these countries needs to do enhanced due diligence. And in practice, that essentially means that these people are going to lose an awful lot of business from EU financial institutions, etc. So Afghanistan, you would expect. Panama, you might expect, one of the top places in the world for setting up offshore companies. Some of the others you may not expect. So, for example, the Bahamas. And the Bahamas are spitting blood about this. this concept that they're there with, you know, Iraq and Syria and places like this. Other places that have been badly hit, Mauritius, for example, and Mauritius, sitting there off the coast of Africa, has been the recipient of much money coming out of, in recent times, for example, Zimbabwe, going through Mauritius, and because of Mauritius's preferred nation status, coming into the EU. And I do a lot of work in Mauritius. I go there a lot, and there are a number of Mauritian businesses who are just closing. And they're saying, come October the 1st, we will have no business. And so there's a lot of pressure being put on the EU by Mauritius and by their other partner, France, to get Mauritius's name taken off this blacklist. Other interesting things there are some very obvious ones, but other interesting things, I think Vanuatu is a small island in the Pacific, and it is kind of a very popular place for Chinese money and Chinese investment, and money has been coming through Vanuatu. So that's now on the blacklist. So we're going to find, come 1st of October, it's only 4 weeks away, a heck of a lot of upheaval in these countries. The EU states themselves, of course, are excluded from the blacklist. Also, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. Since Iceland were not put on the blacklist, we've seen an upsurge of money laundering cases going through Iceland. Because, of course, as I said before, we're looking at Mauritius, at the Bahamas, at Lebanon, for example, but we're not looking at Iceland, and that's where the criminals go. Also, Liechtenstein, you may know, Liechtenstein is one of the #1 places in the world for setting up offshore trusts, and yet it wasn't on the blacklist. And people always say to me when I do this, they say, well, what about Russia? I think that was a political decision, the Russian one. The other country who was going to be on this blacklist right up until the last minute, and we were all briefed that they were going to be on the blacklist, etc., was Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia somehow managed to use their leverage in order to get themselves removed from the blacklist. I thought it'd be useful to go through a few interesting recent examples of money laundering. This is fungibility, and fungibility is one thing being the same in two different places, essentially. So people could, for example, buy shares in corporations listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange and sell them because they are fungible on another stock exchange, for example, on the LSE or the Johannesburg Stock Exchange there. So essentially you're buying stuff with money in one place, selling it and receiving money in another, and that money will go into different bank accounts. So we found quite a lot of that happening over the last 6 months. Other areas which have suddenly appeared as being seen as being high risk, Moldova is one. Moldova, Central Europe, heavily influenced by Russia. They make very good wine. And the Moldovan banking system has been told it's got to clean its act up. A lot of money has been laundered through Moldova in recent years. I think this is great. This is Bruce Bagley, who is one of the leading anti-money laundering experts in the world. I mean, literally, this is one of the top guys in the world, and he has pleaded guilty now to laundering money for Venezuelan crime cartels. So he was sitting in Miami, and he would deliver courses on anti-money laundering. He was invited to all the big conferences. I've seen him speak many times. He was always on TV. You know, this is a guy who really understands money laundering. And of course, it transpires he was a money launderer. And that was why he knew so much about it. And you might think, you know, this is a guy who allegedly, from his speaking engagements and his tenure at the university, etc., you know, he was reputedly earning upwards of $500,000 a year. And why would he throw it all away? But greed's always there. Other new things, this came out earlier this month. This is in Denmark, so that people running AML departments and people who are being put in charge of other staff in terms of AML, you can see there, should have at least 5 years experience of combating money laundering and should have no other responsibilities. So what Denmark is saying, and there are a number of other countries looking at this, what Denmark is saying is that you should just be focused on AML and that the people running the department should have 5 years experience. This I really like. This was during lockdown. So this is a guy in the cryptocurrency world, and he sent $130 worth of Ethereum. Okay, 130. That was the size of the transaction. But he essentially spent nearly $2.6 million in commission. Now, that's either a hell of a mistake, which is, you know, it's always possible, but actually it's much more likely that it's some kind of criminal transaction. And so all around us, as I say, we have money launderers, we have all sorts of new things happening. Sri Lanka, because they've got debt payments coming up, they have decided to allow people, both individuals and corporates, to open what they call a no questions asked deposit account. So it's called a special deposit account. Anyone can open one, you or me, and you can open it in whatever currency you like, and they will pay you more than they'll pay on their normal deposit accounts. It'll be tax-free. It'll be free of the foreign exchange regulations, and it's absolutely an open door to criminal organizations and money laundering. But they are so desperate to get their hands on money to pay some of this debt. They're doing this, and we're starting to see this because of the pandemic and because of lockdown. We're starting to see people perhaps not being as careful or as not checking as much as they would. One of the great ways of laundering money that we've been seeing in recent years is laundering money through art. And we've seen artifacts from Syria, we've seen artifacts from Afghanistan, we've seen paintings from all over the world being used to launder money. And a really good statistic, which may or may not shock you, but 60%, 60% of all art transactions are private. And that is, the world never knows about them. They don't appear on any register anywhere. So using art to launder money is fabulous. This is again, we think back to Bruce Bagley in Miami. These are 5 top art experts in France, in Paris, and they have been arrested because they were selling, allegedly, Middle Eastern artifacts that had been looted from Syria and Iraq. And they'd ended up in places like the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, New York's Met, and again, you know, tens of millions of euros. Other good ways of moving stuff, just so you know, stamps are great. Stamps are worth an awful lot of money, as you know, some stamps, and they're very portable. Put it in your wallet. Yeah, and a little plastic covering, in goes the stamp, and you can easily move 100,000 euros per stamp, no problem at all. So stamps are great. The other thing is diamonds. And obviously I'm not here to teach you how to be a money launderer, but you take the top off your toothpaste, squeeze out a bit of toothpaste, push some diamonds into the toothpaste, and then put it in your bag that goes into the hold of the plane. And we've caught people doing this, so-called diamond mules, who have been moving diamonds out of Africa, for example, and around the world with no hassle at all. Diamonds, of course, many can be untraceable and they can be traded for cash. a recent report, and by recent I mean last month, this report was leaked by the FBI, and the FBI leaks stuff when they want everybody to know about it. They say, well, it's a top secret report, but here you go. And they're looking at hedge funds and private equity. So they think that the next big area for money laundering is going to be hedge funds and private equity. And so what they're saying is that all the hedge funds, all the private equity firms that are not part of bigger groups, i.e. that are standalone, are now at high risk from laundering money. And so they are saying that they all need to have their own AML specialists in-house. You've probably been following, or maybe not. I'm going to move around now because the sun's in my eyes. So come and sit over here, make life a bit easier. There we go. You've probably been following the case of King Juan Carlos of Spain, or ex-King Juan Carlos of Spain. And it transpires, again, allegedly, that he has a heck of a lot of bank accounts overseas and trust funds, etc., into which a heck of a lot of money has gone, including 58 million from the former king of Saudi Arabia, who gave it to him allegedly because he liked him. And this was nothing at all to do with contracts for railways, etc. And so Juan Carlos, who has left Spain and gone to Abu Dhabi, and he's living in that 5-star hotel there that was used in Sex and the City too. And it now turns out that he not only did he have mistresses all around the world, but he had lots and lots and lots of bank accounts all around the world. And this is all unraveling as we go through. Other things we're finding from COVID and from the pandemic is we're finding lots of criminals setting up websites and getting bank accounts for those websites and pretending to sell stuff. So you can see here, you know, some of it's dog products, some is cars, home decorations like furniture and furnishings, you name it. And of course, these companies are nothing at all except fronts, and they receive money for goods never sold, and then they start to put that money through the financial system. And we've seen tons of it in Western Europe, loads of it in America. Wherever you turn, people are doing these kind of things. Many of you, or some of you, may have accounts at some of the new digital-only banks. This is one called Monzo, and it made a double announcement around 3 weeks ago. And it said, firstly, unless we can raise more funds, we may not be able to carry on. But secondly, they said, actually, the quality of our financial crime controls has been quite poor, and we have had some incidents. And so the suspicion is that it may have been used to launder money. And so we're going to see there's a review going on, and you'll see whatever comes out of Monzo. I've always felt that if I wanted to launder money, the easiest way to do it would be by owning a football club. And we know, for example, in the UK, that a number of football clubs have been owned by money launderers. One of the biggest examples is a club called Birmingham City, who was owned by a guy called Carson Young, who was a notorious money launderer. He claimed he made his money out of hairdressing. And around the world, football clubs are notorious because money goes in, money goes out to players. Most of the players' contracts are held offshore. Many of the clubs' ownership consortia or individual owners are offshore. So it is suspected that there is a lot of, I'm going to sneeze. Pardon me. So it is suspected that there is a lot of money laundering through football clubs. This is an example of one of the larger Mexican clubs where the guy has been arrested for money laundering. But football clubs are great. Also, I mean, anything to do with sport is fantastic, and the kind of sports that they're looking at now, because they've gone through the sports, but the kind of things they're looking at now, for example, number one, horse racing, and what they're looking at is the value of the horses. People think, oh, they're looking at gambling, they're looking at this. They're not. They're looking at the value of the horses, because a horse is worth whatever two parties say it's worth. So here in the UK, I live quite near Newmarket, which is the international home of horse racing. And I'll give you a real life example. There was a horse called Silver Grecian, which was sold for £35,000. And under its owners, it won 2 or 3 small races, nothing big. And at the end of that horse racing season, it was sold to a Hong Kong consortium for $1 million. Again, go figure. So they're looking at horse racing. They've been looking at tennis for a long while, and they look at sports events. And I used to work for the Qatar World Cup organizing committee. And the budget for the Qatar World Cup is $220 billion. That's $220 billion. Now, think how much you can launder through $220 billion of construction contracts. A heck of a lot of money. So things like that, anything with the word construction in it, is brilliant for laundering money, as well as our normal suspects. Fines for the first half of this year totaled about $706 million for AML breaches. And in the whole of 2019, that was only $444 million. So the regulators, after a slow start, are starting to catch more people. They're starting to become more aware. They're starting to realize that infractions in money laundering and in bank compliance is going to make them all not rich, but fund them going forward. The most frequent thing financial institutions are getting wrong is still due diligence. We still have pretty poor record of working out who we're dealing with. I've shown you the map of high-risk countries. And I don't really want to make too many comments. There's a few things I do want to say there. One is about dear old New Zealand. We have started to see, right down the bottom corner there, we have started to see a number of, let's get a highlighter here, a laser pointer would be good. We've started to see a number of money laundering cases coming out of New Zealand. And again, because it's been on the least corrupt countries list and all this kind of stuff, it's either New Zealand or Denmark every year. We think people aren't, we're not looking there. We're looking in other places. But actually, the truth is that the criminals go where we're not looking. So New Zealand. Also, we started finding a lot of instances in Iceland. And, again, we weren't looking there. And if we come down here, we find Namibia. And there are a number of investigations going on into Namibia and the way it has been, or we suspect has been used by criminals in order to start the laundering processes for funds. 3 countries added to the watch list for money laundering: Iceland, we've just mentioned, Zimbabwe, and Mongolia. And poor old Mongolia, it's kind of stuck between China and Russia. and it's landlocked. It doesn't actually do much. It mines coal. And I was out there, this is absolutely true, I was out there last year doing some AML stuff for a particular bank. And at the end of my period, they gave a dinner for me, which is always nice. So if anybody ever wants to invite me to dinner, I love dinner. But I was sitting next to the CEO. Like I say, it's absolutely true. And we were chatting away, and the guy at the other side of the CEO looked over and said, "Did you tell him about the North Korean accounts?" And I said, "What?" I said, "We've been here, all this time, and you've never mentioned that you've got," because this bank, like all Mongolian banks, was having trouble getting correspondent facilities because no European bank or American bank would touch them. And what happens is North Korea sends their people to Mongolia to work in the mines, and Mongolia pay the foreign currency back to North Korea in dollars, i.e. the money they get for the coal that they sell abroad, etc. So they've got some real issues, and they're on just about everybody's watch list. Bless them. If you are interested in the new Wolfsburg stuff, there's this one, which is about delivering an effective AML program. I think they've lifted it, who knows where, from any number of banks, frankly. But it's worth looking at. There's that one. There's the one on source of wealth that has come out, and there's various refinements to trade finance questionnaires, etc. But it's there anyway if you look at. The US last week, or no, the Friday before last, came out with some new guidance on PEPs, politically exposed persons, and whether they should always be considered high risk. And previously, financial institutions were just saying, okay, all PEPs are high risk. That was really the blanket thing they had. Now the Americans are saying, no, not every PEP is high risk. And they shouldn't be viewed as being high risk purely because they're a PEP. And that's quite a change. And there's been no real reaction from Europe yet. I mean, there will be, I'm sure, but so far there's been no real reaction from Europe. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens there. There has been a focus over the last year or so on what we call professional money launderers, or PMLs. And these are either individuals or groups, and what they'll do is they'll launder your money for you. So if you're slightly worried about doing it all yourself, you just give it to one of these people and they'll do it for you. It's like a sort of tube. You put the dirty money in one end and it comes out the other clean. And they will charge you anywhere between 40 and 80% for doing so. So we found charges at both ends. So you're going to lose, let's say you're laundering 20 million euros, you're going to lose maybe up to 16 million, maybe a tiny bit more. But at least what you've got left will be clean and relatively risk-free. And these people, they'll be huge organizations. So that they'll have lawyers, they'll have accountants, they'll have trust and company service providers, TCSPs, they'll have notaries, they'll have corrupt bankers, they'll have people who know how to open accounts at banks, etc., around the world. They'll have offshore financial advisors, you name it, these people will have it. And they operate as homogeneous businesses. And for them, it is big business. And it's something you're going to hear a lot more of over the next 3 or 4 years, this idea of professional money launderers. And we very rarely catch them. Every now and again, we catch some of the people who are involved, but we actually very rarely get the whole organization. This made me laugh. The register of ship ownerships came out earlier this year. I love this. And this is, historically ships may have been registered in Liberia or Panama or one of these sort of places. So now we're finding ship ownership. Where is your ship registered? Well, increasingly it's Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, landlocked, no ports, nothing to do with shipping whatsoever. They've just made themselves very attractive to ship owners. Secondly, and I've given you a picture of it there on the right-hand side, that's Newry in Northern Ireland. It has a small river, and by small, I mean very small. But aside from that, it's landlocked. It's got no connection with the sea, whatever. Also Vancouver, and once again, Potter's Bar. For those of you who live in London, you'll know Potter's Bar is just the other side of the M25. And all these ships are registered in one building in Potter's Bar. It's not even a number of buildings, it's one building that is also the home to thousands of limited partnerships and companies that we don't necessarily know who the beneficiaries are of those. So we're starting to see these weird things happening. Who would have thought, for example, 2 years ago, that when you were looking at a ship registry, you'd be looking at Potter's Bar? Other places, you probably saw what happened in Lebanon with the explosion. It transpires, and there's a lot more to come out on this, but it transpires the ship that was involved in that was registered in Moldova. And the organization in Moldova that had given it its seaworthy certificate was owned by the guy who owned the ship, ultimately. And he owned it through a number of companies based in Panama, etc. There's a lot more to come out about the Lebanese thing. But the more we examine it, the more we discover that everything was not quite as it seemed. And it looks like there was a certain amount of money laundering and essentially prohibited goods being trafficked. One of the big areas, of course, for laundering money is real estate. London has been a particular friendly place to anybody who wants to buy a property and not declare who they are. That is now changing. There are new rules. So people do have to declare beneficial ownership, and the government can take steps to find out who they are. But if you look at One Hyde Park, for example, some of the most expensive real estate in the world, we still don't, I think there's 60 apartments there, and we still don't know the beneficial ownership of, or the beneficial owners of something like 48. So we're still a way behind. Real estate is brilliant. I thought I would show you this. And some of you will know that it is still possible in Dubai to walk into a developer's office with a huge wad of cash and buy an apartment off plan. Just going to answer the chat. Oh, there we go. So you can still go and buy off plan, and then you flip it a week later and have the money paid to your bank account elsewhere. And you can see $400 million is what they're estimated to be worth. And there's now a group of agents and middlemen in Dubai who are targeting their sales specifically at Nigeria and Nigerian connected people and what we may think are high-risk individuals. We're also spending a lot of time looking nowadays at what we call the extractive industry, so oil, gas, diamonds, mining of any kind, because there's a lot of corruption, a lot of bribes, a lot of general fraud, and the money from that needs to be laundered. So we are spending a lot of time looking at that, and it's an area where law enforcement are spending a lot of resource looking at. Cryptocurrencies, of course, and I went to a conference on this just before lockdown, and I was talking to one of the senior guys, and he said, well, look, the problem we have is, and we all know this, is how do we regulate what we can't see? That for everything we do see, there are thousands and thousands of crypto exchanges out there that we never see. People setting up wallets to buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum. The one they're all excited about at the minute, because they think a lot of money's been laundered through it, is called Monero. And so keep an eye on that. It's a name you're going to see and hear an awful lot more of. The European and American legislation now allows crypto exchanges to be regulated, but if it's based in Serbia, if it's based in Macau, if it's based in the ether, how can you regulate it if you can't see them? And we know, for example, in terms of terrorist financing, that Hamas have been asking for donations in Bitcoin. We know that some of the biggest Bitcoin traders in the world are North Korea. And you probably saw the various Bitcoin hacks. And I quite like the one, see that guy was impersonating Obama and all these people. But of course, it turned out it was some American spotty kid, like the guy out of The Simpsons from his bedroom in Ohio or somewhere like that. We also have all the new payment products and services, and these are smart cards. These are cards which are not even banks. They're just payment cards, just used for transferring money. You can load currency up on them, etc. And all of these are seen as being vulnerable. Store cards. There was a guy just after lockdown, in fact, he was one of the first customers, apparently, into John Lewis in Oxford Street, and he tried to buy £50,000 worth of gift cards, apparently to send them to all his family and friends. I think we all know what was going on there. But so all the new technology, while it helps us, it also hurts us. Mobile gaming, any online game or mobile game where you can make in-app purchases, we know has been targeted by money launderers. So every time you might buy, I don't know, whatever it is for Minecraft or something like that, it is possible that money launderers are doing exactly the same thing. And that is big business. So we know that there are lots and lots of different types of money laundering schemes going on. It's difficult to spot them all. One of the key things about them is we need to actually work out who we're dealing with. So there's a picture of a lady on the screen there. And you can send me a message, just write in. Who do you think that is? So most of you will have thought it's the Queen. And yet, of course, it's the Queen. Absolutely, it's the Queen. But the Queen, the Queen, the Queen. Great. I love that. How do we know she's the Queen? She is possibly the only person on Earth who doesn't have a passport because she's the Queen. She has no driving license. There are no utility bills addressed to her. Nothing is addressed to her, official, if you see in terms of ID. So how do we know she wasn't swapped 30 years ago by an international criminal mastermind? And the reason I put this up here is because the Queen's Bank is Coutts. And some years ago, Coutts went on a drive to attract more customers. They're an upmarket private bank. You've probably seen their offices in the Strand, I think. And so they're all there. They were told, go out, your relationship managers, get loads more accounts. So this they did, but they didn't do proper due diligence and they got fined for it. And it was found that they'd let lots of people in. So they were told to go away and work, do remediation, find out who your customers are. So how do you do remediation on the Queen? Ask for a passport? There's no passport. Driving license? No driving license. Utility bills? Forget it. But of course, she's the Queen. And I remember talking to someone very high up in a bank, and he said that we were asked to try and, prove who she was. And the answer, auto EKYC, yeah. But the answer was, she's the Queen. She doesn't have to prove who she is. She's the Queen. And the regulators were saying, no, you have to prove who every single one of your customers is. this is all complicated slightly by golden visas. And golden visas are where you pay a certain amount of money or invest a certain amount of money in a country in order to get citizenship or residency rights. And we've already talked about Malta. It's quite a low threshold in Malta. Also Cyprus, and Cyprus has said that it's overhauling its golden visa program. But you may have seen that a number of Saudi nationals are now EU citizens through Cyprus, and there are a number of Russian nationals who are now EU citizens through Cyprus and also through Malta. But the UK does it as well. If you're prepared to invest lots of money, then you will get residency rights, and after a certain number of years, you will have the right to citizenship. And this is from, there's a friend of mine, I have to be careful what I say here, there's someone I know who operates a golden visa scheme. He's an offshore advisor. And this is from his marketing literature, where he's saying to people, great, I can get you a passport from the UK, from the EU, from, when he says North America, he mostly means Canada, but also Latin America, Asia, any one of the Caribbean countries. And this is for as little as $50,000. And you can see all the benefits there and all the rest of it. When I do my normal courses, we go through all his literature. It's very, very funny. It's a charter for money launderers. There are three parts to due diligence: identification and verification, KYC, and EDD. And I want to have a look at this. So identification. And we all think, oh, it's pretty easy. You know, we can look at documents, we can look them up, we've got social media intelligence, we've got all this kind of stuff. Well, a couple of websites for you to enjoy, not tonight, but you know. The first is Replace Your Docs. And Replace Your Docs has a number of geographical areas. So there's one for Europe, there's one for America, there are various ones around the world. And on this website, you can buy any utility bill, bank statement, anything with proof of address, you can buy it. They will set it up for you. They will customize it. They will put whatever money you want in there. So if you want to show to a third-party bank that you are earning $30,000 a month and it's going into an HSBC account, these people, for around £60, will sell you an HSBC bank statement showing that you're earning that kind of money. All of our products are designed to be used for theatrical, educational, or novelty purposes only. I like that one. So this is a legitimate website, and you can buy all this stuff. Passports and driving licenses are bought on what's called the darknet, and you get into the darknet using some specific browsers, and you can essentially buy anything you want on there, normally paid with Bitcoin or something like that. This is a screenshot from the darknet, which is European driving licenses. And I'm not suggesting you go and do this because I get told off for doing that. John says, how come it's not been put down? Because if we go back, they have that thing that says this is, this is for theatrical, educational, and novelty purposes only. So they can say, well, you know, if people choose to go and defraud banks with this, that's up to them. So that's why. So on this is a screenshot from the darknet, and you can see you can buy any European driver's license on there to prove your identity. You can also buy working passports. There is also a website called, and you might want to write this down because it's a fun website. You're going to have a play around on it. It's called fakepersongenerator.com. So fakepersongenerator.com. And that allows you to put in your parameters. So if you want to be a 21-year-old girl, you put that in, you put where you want to live, you click go, and it'll create a totally fake person for you, even down to social security numbers, telephones, email addresses, all that kind of stuff. And then you go onto the dark web, and what you do is you use it to buy stuff. And you buy, sorry, just get this question up. You can buy your passports and your driving licenses for all of those. And again, how come it's not been put down? Because the people say, oh, it's just a bit of fun. It's there for fun. It's not, you know, it's not real life. But actually, criminals who know how to use it, they know. And now you know, and I know. So it's worth having a look at. This is one of my favorite guys. This is the Prince of Montenegro, bless him. And you can see him on the left there. And Montenegro, is, you probably know, is a little principality in sort of Europe, squidged between Greece and Albania and Serbia, places like that. But you can see him there with Novak Djokovic on the right-hand side. Oh, so the left-hand side as you look at it. On the right-hand side, you can see him, that's Pamela Anderson, the American actress, and he is making her a Dame of Montenegro. And you can also see there, the guy was the Crown Prince of Thailand. And this guy is someone else, I can't remember who he is. But there's pictures of him with the Pope and with other heads of state. And he was invited to all these banquets and flying around the world. He had, you know, credit cards, business accounts, all this. Anyway, you've guessed it. He's an Italian farmer. There is no royal family of Montenegro. This guy is a fake and a fraud, and nobody checked. He got away with this for years without anybody saying, hang on a sec, because people wanted to believe it. And we find this with financial institutions. I was talking to the head of one of them, and he was saying, well, the worst, there are two phrases he said I hate. He said the first one is software upgrade. And I said, yeah, well, I can understand that. And he said, and the second one is the word no in terms of AML. He said, we say we know who our clients are because we've known them for 20 years. Do you really know them? One bank I did some work for, they were doing remediation on their customers. And they found in certain geographical areas of the world, up to 8% of their customers were fake. Didn't exist. And that's an awful lot of accounts, isn't it? So knowing who we're dealing with is imperative. This is a recent example. This is in Ireland, where 126 Romanians went round Ireland setting up fake bank accounts using fake documents. And what they then did was they set up all these websites selling tractors, cars, caravans, Rolexes, you name it. And people would buy them, and the money would come into these bank accounts in Ireland, and of course, the goods would never be delivered. And each account had all the documents in their own shoebox. So, and they each had a mobile phone that was just to do with that account, not for any other account at all. And within 24 hours of the money coming in, it would go out again. And we have not found any of the money. So fake documents does work. There are still people out there. I hear what you say about eKYC and all the rest of it. How difficult, how costly do you think it is to set up from nowhere a fake person with Facebook profiles, with social media profiles, with open source intelligence profiles, etc. It's really easy. It doesn't cost all that much. We have found instances of Russian gangsters, Ukrainian gangsters, African gangsters, British gangsters, all setting up fresh fake IDs and fresh personas, avatars, if you like, and getting away with it. We call these people straw men. These are people with no identity, no, they don't, when we talk about no substance, they don't really, not good. Yeah, too much fake out there. Absolutely, John. And examples of straw men, well, just about every, any individual who looks like they're very rich but really aren't, and all they're acting is as a front for someone else. We talked about PEPs. The list of who's a PEP and who isn't a PEP has been expanded, and this is the close associates, but actually it goes further than that. And I had a guy come up to me while I was working at a bank in London and doing this, and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, yeah, okay. He said, am I a PEP? And he said, I married the ex-oil minister of Nigeria's niece. He said, should I tell the bank? And I said, I think you should tell the bank. And he said, but if I tell the bank, they're going to fire me for not telling them. So what should I do? And I said, well, I can't really advise you. But I saw him a little later, and he said, well, I resigned and went to another bank and I told them. So right at the start, I've got a clean slate, he said, and they are treating me as a PEP. So it does stretch quite a long way. So I kind of like this. PEPs or high-risk customers. Well, top left, Beyonce is an ambassador for the United Nations and for UNESCO and stuff like that. So yeah, she's a PEP. And you may remember she was fairly close to Michelle Obama. The lady in the middle at the top, we've kind of worked out, we haven't got a clue who she is. Messi is a high-risk customer because he's a convicted tax evader, and therefore he ought to be a high-risk customer. Let me go through the questions again. Bottom left, that's the Emir of Qatar. It's my old boss. So obviously he's very pepped. And of course, bottom right, dear Donald is very pepped. In the middle, as a young man, is the man who was, for a period of time, the world's largest money launderer. That's Guzman, the Mexican, now in a US prison. And the reason that I put him there is that two of the banks that he banked with, one North American, one European, both had him down as a medium risk customer. Medium risk customer. When it was fairly commonly known he was one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in the world. And all these people use all sorts of different structures to conceal beneficial ownership. For example, trusts. And setting up trusts where the beneficiary is hidden is the easiest thing in the world. We could go to Liechtenstein tonight and set up a trust and it would be absolutely fine. We could have shell companies. We could have offshore corporations, whether bearer shares or registered shares. Non-profit organizations and charities. Charities are great for laundering money. They really are great for laundering money, because you can do things like have charitable lottos where you're the winner every month, for example, or you take in large donations, and we know that organizations like Hezbollah, etc., have been funded by charities. And so there are, yes, absolutely, yeah, Divya, because of the corruption in cricket in recent years, then yes, cricket players, international cricket players, are considered high risk and should be considered that way. And I mean, just about any high profile sportsman, to be honest, I would consider high risk. Work. There we go. You're very welcome. So there are all sorts of ways that people can hide who they are, and they hide behind all these weird structures, most of which are in offshore areas. Now, most of those offshore areas, or most of those offshore places, not all, but about 90%, have little British flags up in the corner. So we go back to Her Majesty the Queen. It's often ex-British colonies or areas that have a connection still with Britain that are the biggest players in the offshore markets. For example, Vanuatu, most of the Caribbean countries, those Nauru, Tuvalu, those South Pacific organizations. We talked about Malta, we talked about Cyprus, Gibraltar, for example, these kind of places. And you can see there, it's estimated that roughly, well, somewhere between 21 and 32 trillion dollars is offshore at any one time. And an amazing statistic that 25 offshore companies register a change of ownership every minute. 25 every minute. And what the vast majority of that is just trying to confuse, just laying a trail to confuse. So when we go and try and find out who is the owner of the British Virgin Islands company or Cayman or whatever it happens to be, it takes us too long. And by the time we actually find out who they are, the money is gone. And I thought I'd give you a couple of examples. That's the BVI, the British Virgin Islands. You can see there in the photo. It's good for two things, really. The first is offshore financial services, and the second is yachting. They are very beautiful, very lovely, and wonderful beaches, a little prone to hurricanes. But the stats, 400,000 companies based there, $1.5 trillion in assets, and everything's a PO box. So it's just about 12 buildings in Tortola, all of which PO boxes, nothing else. If you look at Cayman, volcanic rock, 7 miles long, not very wide, 7 Mile beach, very nice beach, but there's no arable land, there's no economy, there's no infrastructure apart from, I think, 4 roads, proper roads, and yet it's the 5th largest financial center in the world by assets. And again, Cayman Islands are great for two things. One is laundering money, offshore financial services. And secondly, they're really good for looking at stingrays and stuff like that, but not much else. And the regulators there have a pretty easy life of it, as you might expect. There is some movement on these. So we're trying to force them to be transparent, to set up central registers of beneficial owners, of who the lawyers are that are setting up these companies, etc. It's going to take a while. The first thing that came out of Cayman was, well, it doesn't fit with our national law. Well, you know, national law for an island of 10,000 people, it's, you know, but it's happening. There is some change. Even in the UK, though, we have issues with some of these companies. You can see there, about 330,000 state they have no beneficial owner. These are live companies. And they're saying, who owns you? No, nobody owns us. We don't have an owner, us. You can see there, 487 of those have a circular ownership structure, which essentially means, you know, we're owned by a trust, which is owned by an offshore company, which is owned by a foundation, which is owned by us. So they have a circular ownership structure, meaning they own themselves. There is lots of technology for KYC out there. There's people are saying, well, this is going to be the future. We will be able to have, for example, eKYC. We'll have people given numbers and everything given at birth, and we'll be able to take their fingerprints, and we'll be able to use biometrics, and we'll be able to do all this kind of thing. Well, you know, again, I go back to the statistic that came out of Singapore, which was that for every dollar the financial sector spends on anti-money laundering and AML technology, the criminals are spending 5. So every bit of data we collect, they're trying to confuse us. Every time we come up with something that's groundbreaking and market leading, they try to confuse us. And we have all sorts of potential issues with technology. Undoubtedly, technology is really good at some stuff. The big issue we have, I don't think it's technology necessarily. I think the big issue we have is culture. That we need to move away, and you may not like me saying this, but we need to move away in terms of financial services from this idea of revenue. Everything's pushing towards revenue, revenue, revenue. It's all bonus driven, etc. And we need to start thinking about risk. And that's what all the new regulations are doing. They're saying to people, it's all about risk. You have to think about risk. And that brings us nicely back to where we started. But there is one thing that I want to just flag up to you because I think that it's quite an important thing, and it is Wirecard. And some of you will have come across Wirecard. Wirecard was a German tech company that provided payment transfer services globally. And it was one of Germany's largest tech companies, its biggest tech success, listed on the main board, one of the top 50 companies in Germany. And it vanished sort of like that. It was like a house of cards. People started talking about Wirecard a couple of years ago, and in a bad way. And then when it collapsed very quickly. Anyway, it's looking like Wirecard may have been used to launder money. It's looking like Wirecard may have been used to finance terrorism, particularly payments to ISIS and payments in and out of Syria and Iran. And it's looking like there's $3 billion missing, I think, but they haven't yet calculated how much money was actually transferred. And so I think you're going to find over the next couple of years that Wirecard is going to be one of the big AML scandals of our time. Forget Estonia. And the other thing I just want to finish off by showing you is there is a thing called the Basel Institute, which you may have come across, which is that every year they publish their countries most vulnerable to money laundering. And I have it up here. Nigeria is number 14. But when this came out, I was thinking to myself, what on earth is going on here? Because if we go down to the least vulnerable country, number 141, you can see there's the least vulnerable to money laundering is Estonia. And this is the same Estonia, ladies and gentlemen, that has laundered, we think, about $500 billion for Russians. The same Estonia where all of the banks are now being investigated. All of them have been fined. And yet there it is. I give you the Basel AML index with Estonia as the least vulnerable country in the world. So it's number 14, Nicaragua. I apologize for that. Let me see, there it is, number 14, Nigeria. There we go. So there we go, ladies and gents. That's the end of the sort of formal thing. I'm very happy to take any questions that you have.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for I think doing a very, very good presentation. I think it was very, very enlightening. I think most of us would attest to the fact that it was very well put together and very, very informative. So thanks again for doing justice to that. Yeah, thanks so much. So we will encourage some questions. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and or if you're bold enough, feel free to also you can meet your mic and you could ask a question, but I will encourage you to type your questions on the chat. I will kick this off. I'll kick this off by one or two questions from
Yeah.
your discussion. I didn't realize that my question is more of like a summary. I didn't realize there were so many avenues where someone could perpetrate fraud out there. Some of them there's so, as I said, there's so much fake out there, and one begins to know it's very challenging for the KYC. Um, how well do you think AML or financial crime compliance is doing in the UK, compared to other countries, if you want to compare in terms of the measures that have been put in place in the UK compared to other countries? How well do you think the country as such is doing?
I think we do okay. I mean, I think we one of the issues we have here is we have too many regulatory bodies
Hmm.
dealing with financial crime. So some of it's dealt with by HMRC, some of it's dealt with by the FCA, some by the PRA. There are various governmental bodies that deal with it, and it's so fragmented. And I think what we need, the gold standard is America. Yeah, where they have got the financial sector so scared of big fines, they are putting compliance officers in prison, and they're taking away the worldly goods of compliance officers. So I think that's what we need to aspire to. In the UK, we're not too bad, but we have too many bodies, and we don't need all of those bodies. It should be centralized. They need better people working there. They need people who've got experience of financial crime rather than simply lawyers and accountants.
Yeah, thanks for that. Um, Another question that I want to ask is, I know you talked about regulations being focusing on getting people to focus about risk
Yeah,
and risk. But on the other hand, there is a balance of play whereby people in the front office, like myself, are thinking about revenue. We want to generate revenue because that's what we're employed to do. Where do you think there's the balance of play between risk or being compliant and also generate revenue? Is it
yeah.
tilting towards revenue or risk is beginning to take over?
I think risk is beginning to take over. I think it depends which bank you're in, to be fair, because for many people now, many banks, the revenue side of it is just one KPI out of all the others. There are still some banks out there I know where revenue is everything, but the reality is that risk is becoming more and more important. Every new regulatory diktat that comes down focuses on risk. And so I think risk is going to become equally important.
Okay, thanks for that. There's a question in the forum from Divya. He's saying that can you explain a little bit more about money laundering using cryptocurrency? Um, just to add to that question, I know you listed a few technologies out there to enhance our KYC or AML processes
Yeah,
with the use of blockchain, maybe not blockchain, for things like machine learning, artificial intelligence. These are new technologies out there, which you have several companies begin to develop to
yeah,
enhance some of the AML checks because it's a very, very manual process.
yeah.
Where do you see these technology heading to? What do you think is the best in terms of having to combat financial crime?
Well, there's two things there. The first thing to say is yes. I mean, we estimate that it will save. I think the figure is 20 million man hours by 2022.
Hmm.
Second thing is there are not a few companies out there doing this. There are hundreds out there doing this.
Hmm.
Whether they're sitting in a sandbox or they're in Silicon Roundabout or they're wherever they happen to be on Victoria Island, who knows? There are thousands of them doing it. Who knows who's going to be left at the end of the day? All these people won't be left standing. And so what I would guarantee you, to answer your question, what I guarantee you is those who are going to be the most successful will be bought out by the big players.
Mm.
I don't think they'll stay, independent like SunGard and people like this. They'll be bought out by people like that. Does it work? Well, Wirecard shows it doesn't necessarily work. There have been other instances where it doesn't necessarily work. I think AI will be a big boon to people. So that's on the technological side of it. In terms of cryptocurrencies, yeah, if you go on the web, on the dark web, you will find thousands of cryptocurrency exchanges. And I don't know whether you know how this works, but you create a wallet, you buy some cryptocurrency, and it gets dropped into your wallet. And you get a receipt. I mean, we're always telling people, aren't we, don't write down your PIN numbers. But the reality is, if you're dealing in cryptocurrencies, you want to write down your PIN number, yeah, because it's going to be a 12, 14 digit and lettered number, whatever. And so that's your wallet. It's got your cryptocurrency in it. Now, when you want to go and sell it, you could go to any one of a number of exchanges. And what the launderers do is they would perhaps open 100 wallets and put cryptocurrencies in each, and then they'll move them around through different exchanges. And each move is designed to try and obscure where the money's coming from and who the owner is. And then you take it out in another exchange in the dark web. Now, if you're doing that, nobody has seen that. No regulatory body has seen it. No bank has seen it. So if I'm delivering money to Hamas, all I need to do is give Hamas the number of the wallet, and they then control the money. Yeah, so nobody has seen that. And, again, how do we regulate what we can't see? It is just impossible. I'd love to tell you there's a solution. But any cryptocurrency that stands up and allows itself to be regulated, that's fantastic. But why would a criminal organization do that? They're not going to say, hey, here, look at us, if you see what I mean. And we don't have to go back to the question about technology. We don't have the technology yet to spot that. I mean, one of the slides I didn't show you was at the minute, they're having a sale on the dark web of automatic weapons. So if you want to buy yourself an AK-47, it's $1,000 off. So you can buy just about anything on the dark web, and we are to a certain extent behind the curve, and even our technology is behind the curve in terms of plain vanilla stuff, which is transaction monitoring, trying to spot patterns. Remember what I said. Every one of these we're using, the criminals are using one to try and confuse it. And then it becomes an arms race.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. There's a question that says, from Euro, he's saying, what are the major highlights of the new WOB spec questionnaire? What are the FIs expected to focus on? I think looking at the new WOB spec questionnaire, just the highlights.
Well, which questionnaire are we talking about? The source of wealth one?
I think the question was on the WOB spec. WOB spec, yep. I think is
There's Wolfsburg Trade Finance.
Yeah.
And there's the source of wealth.
All right, Trace, not mentioned. I know of the trade finance one, and maybe the source of wealth.
The trade finance one is relatively simple because it's much easier to use artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff in trade finance. The trouble, and I'm sure you see this every day, where you have issues is what we call third-party risk. So it's not and the questionnaire goes into this, is it's not your customer, it's your customer's customer or your correspondent's customer or whatever it happens to be. And that third party risk is an absolute killer in trade finance. There are so many people involved in the process. How on earth can you possibly hope to know who they all are? And again, you're probably not going to walk away from a customer because they've got a long chain of people behind them. If Alan says source of wealth, yeah, I mean, source of wealth. Look, I've got a very, I think Wolfsberg has really stated the obvious. And people always say to me, and Wolfsberg doesn't give an answer to this, but people always say to me, well, how far back do we go? You know, first of all, define source of wealth. Well, it's the economic activity that's generated the wealth, but it's how far back do we go? And someone said to me, well, if you look at the Philippine Stock Exchange, many of the major companies are linked to the Marcos family. And he was the dictator there for many years, etc. And therefore, given that he's been dead for 30 years, should we now deal with them? Because 30 years have passed. When does it pass? And that's a really difficult question. And what Wolfsberg says is you need to look at today's risk. And then as a compliance team, pardon me, you need to make a judgment on that. And I'll give you a real life example. I know a bank in London, there was an Indian family who were trying to use a house in Notting Hill valued at nearly 20 million as their source of wealth. And they had no documents because they said, well, it had been bombed during the Second World War. The documents were in the basement. They'd all been destroyed. And the UK Land Registry didn't come into force till 1969. So would you accept that as source of wealth? Now,
No.
British banks didn't. They said no.
No.
But they found an American bank who would. And so they were able to get personal and business accounts with the American bank. There are people who have wandered into banks, and I've seen and said, well, I've got a Rembrandt, or I've got a, you know. So what Wolfsberg says is, as well as the audit trail for the checking you've done, there has to be a plausibility test. So is it plausible that this 23-year-old has a Rembrandt? So there is, it's, you know, that you all know, and it's good for us because it's our jobs, isn't it? You all know this is as much an art as it is a science. And I call it the Wolfsberg thing, they call it professional skepticism. And I use a different phrase because it's a much better phrase. I call it the smell test. And when I talk about culture, it's every member of staff should be beaten around the head with a wet fish and told the smell test. Because too many financial institution staff think that when they've ticked the boxes, they've done their job. Ticking the boxes is just the start of the job. Anything smelly, anything fishy. And I say that and I get attacked because then compliance come back and say, oh, for God's sake, what did you tell them? Because they've now started making 2,000 reports a day. But the reality is, it all starts with us. It all starts with the first line of defense. And no machine is going to replace that. And if you look at the FCA discussion paper that came out last year, they warned all member firms against using technology purely for this.
Mark, thanks. Just one or two more questions. I know you've been in this industry for a very long time. You said like 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And within KYC, AML, and I know you're an authority in this field. And there might be one or two persons who are in this forum who are thinking about going into AML, KYC compliance. Just what do you think? What advice will you give to them just a career path Some person they want to move or some might think of move from AML to compliance. But what do you advise in terms of the career path and to stay as up to date as yourself and to remain in this industry like yourself?
I think it's a great career path. We've seen since lockdown banks and financial institutions trying to cut costs, and so they've been trimming the size of their compliance teams and also cutting training budgets. But of course, as they've been doing that, the fines are going up, and they're going to try and rely on technology purely to do this for them. It'll do some stuff. It won't do the others. There will be globally a growing need for staff working in the field of financial crime. And that may be AML, it may be terrorist financing, it may be sanctions, it may be fraud, anything that's coming out of a predicate crime. I believe there will be a growing demand for people. It's a good business to be in, and you have to remember, it's only actually been a profession for less than 30 years. It's a very young profession, and we're just starting to see senior people coming in. And I can tell you that there's, I'm not going to tell you which bank, but there is a head of compliance at one of the banks in London, and their package last year was about £2.5 million. And they got fined. The KYC team sits in the second line of defense. And that question is, John, always a question that depends on the size of your business. Yeah, there are all sorts of businesses out there who are now, because they're obliged entities, they are forced to have compliance teams, etc. And if they're small enough, they all sit together. And I've seen this happen many times. But in general terms, KYC will be a second line of defense.
Is KYC seen as regulatory requirement now, or just a business requirement?
No, it's both. And if you look at the regulations, just finish answering John. Yes, they should, John. In terms of requirements, regulators are all now talking about reputational risk. So it's both a business risk, a reputational risk, financial risk because you could be fined, but also a legal risk because you could be sued.
Okay. Right. I think it's just about time. If there's no other question, we just want to say thank you. Presentation has been amazing. There's been a couple of feedback saying that your presentation has been amazing. And if anyone wants a copy of the slides, feel free to touch base with myself. I'm happy to send you a copy. You could send me an email, likemice88@gmail.com. Also, if you want to know a little bit more about Like Minds, feel free to check out our website. We're an African professional network aimed at supporting Africans in diaspora. We're not it's not any company, it's just a group of friends coming together to provide manpower support. We do have our peculiar challenges being in the UK, so we provide that work-day support amongst ourselves, and we've had some success stories as a result of our network. So thank you. Check out our website, and thanks, Mark, for a brilliant presentation. And
you're very welcome. Have a good evening, everyone. And if you need to get in touch with me, you can do so through John.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, everyone. You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Okay, good night, all.
Thanks, John.
Okay, night. That's all right. Good night. Right.